आ गई मेरी आवाज़ क्या? नूम मिस्टेक्स होती रहती हैं, कोई बात नहीं। मैं ये स्पीकर क्या कहते हैं, माइक लगाना भूल गया था। एक बार मैं क्विकली चेक कर लेता हूँ हमारा लाइव चल रहा है क्या। तो क्विकली चेक करने के लिए बस एक सेकंड दो मुझे। ठीक है, चल रहा है। तो जैसा कि आप लोग जानते हो, हम्म मेरा नाम है अक्षय अग्रवाल, ये आप लोगों को पता है। अब इस चैनल पे हो आप लोग तो कोई बात नहीं, पता है आप लोगों को। सेकंड, हम लोगों ने जावा की जर्नी स्टार्ट की है, तो हमने ऊप्स कॉन्सेप्ट, फिर उसके बाद अ, ये क्या कहते हैं, कलेक्शन फ्रेमवर्क, देन उसके बाद एक्सेप्शन हैंडलिंग, देन मल्टी थ्रेडिंग, और ये सब करते कराते हम लोग अब जाके पहुंचे हैं स्प्रिंग बूट पे। स्टार्टिंग से मुझे स्प्रिंग बूट करना था, बट क्योंकि थोड़ा इनिशियल प्रेप लगता है तो वो करना पड़ेगा। स्प्रिंग बूट करके हम अपने प्रोजेक्ट्स बनाना चाहते हैं बेसिकली। तो वो हमारी जर्नी है। और ये अभी हम लोग स्प्रिंग बूट पढ़ रहे हैं तेलुगु से, तो अगर आपको डायरेक्टली वो वीडियो देखना है तेलुगु का, तो आप नीचे डिस्क्रिप्शन में लिंक है, वहाँ पे डायरेक्टली देख सकते हो। हम लोगों ने थोड़ा कवर कर लिया है स्प्रिंग बूट। हमने एक इनिशियल प्रोजेक्ट बनाया था रेस्ट मैपिंग यूज़ करके, एक सिंपल राउट बनाया था। बीन्स के बारे में हमने देख लिया। हमने कल डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन देखा था, और ऑटो वायरिंग चल रहा है। तो वहाँ से आज स्टार्ट होगा। तो चलते हैं विंडो स्क्रीन पे, और ये चल रही है हमारी वीडियो। काफ़ी वियर्ड जगह पे
We were
पॉज है
able
ये। हाँ, तो कल हमने ये कंस्ट्रक्टर सेटर इंजेक्शन, गेटर इंजेक्शन स्प्रिंग में एक्सएमएल में किस तरह करते हैं वो देखा था। तो वो मैंने प्रोजेक्ट में बिल्ड नहीं किया है, क्योंकि मुझे स्प्रिंग में खास इंटरेस्ट नहीं है पर्सनली। कभी कोई प्रोजेक्ट मिला या करना पड़ा तो उस केस में ये नॉलेज काम आ जाएगी। तो वी आर गुड देयर। तो अब आगे बढ़ते हैं और शुरू करते हैं वीडियो।
constructor. So yeah, that's how basically you work with setter and the constructor injection with the help
ठीक
of primitive values and the reference values. So I
है, एक सेकंड, मुझे लग रहा है मैंने एक चीज़ और गड़बड़ की है। एक मिनट रुको, एक मिनट रुको।
hope it was fun. Now till this point, we were able to achieve constructor and setter injection. It's time to talk about auto wiring. If you remember, when we talked about Spring Boot, we have done this in Spring Boot. We have done with auto wiring. But here also, without Spring Boot, let's try to explore it. And even before we do that, if you remember the Spring Boot videos, we have talked about different classes and interfaces, because in this case, we only have laptop and developer. What we don't have is computer interface and desktop implementation of it. So let's create those and let's get forward. So what I will do is I will just go back here and say, let me just copy and paste, or maybe reuse the same laptop class, but this time we'll name it as desktop. And in desktop, we'll change certain things. I will just close this part. And in desktop, what I will do is when I say the constructor should be desktop created. And in the compiling, I will say compiling with or compiling in desktop. Okay, so these are the changes I made. So in the laptop, it says compiling. I will just change it to compiling in laptop. Okay, nothing fancy, just two different classes for the same concept. And when I say concept, these two are the same type, right? So they both are computer. So what I will do is I will just extract the interface out of it, extract the interface, and we'll name this as computer. You can do this in different IDEs. Otherwise, you can just simply create an interface and have this method which we want. So if you go to computer, okay, void compile. So I wanted this method. I don't know what. I made some mistake while refactoring it, doesn't matter. So you can see we got the interface, which is computer, and both these classes, the laptop and desktop, need to implement computer. So I will say implements computer. If this is not happening by default in your IDE, just try to manually type it. That should not be a problem. So we got the interface. Computer, and then we got two implementation, laptop and desktop. Okay, just to go with this concept of coding for the interfaces. Now since we have made those changes, I also want to change my developer. Now developers should not be dependent on a laptop, right? So developer should be dependent on a computer. So I will just mention computer here, and here also I will just say this is a type. I will say comp.
Run Windows, Linux, and more on your Mac with unmatched.
Even comp works. Okay, and then since we have made those changes, I have to also change the, in fact, I will just remove this particular constructor of parameters constructor of dev. And then we have to make two changes here. So when I say two changes, basically I want to change the getter setters, not for laptop this time, but for the computer. So I will just say generate getter setters for the computer. I will say okay. And now we got this two getter set. We got these two methods. And then here also in the build, I will say com.compile, not laptop.compile. Because as a developer, it doesn't matter which one you want to use, which one you are using basically, desktop or laptop.
ये साउंड आ रहा होगा ना? माइक भी चल गया आई थिंक हमारा। ये कैसे दोनों चल गए? एक सेकंड। चलो अब आ गया। थैंक्स यार, मेरा तो पूरा लाइव हो जाता है ऐसे ही खत्म। मस्त। थैंक यू थैंक यू। चलो आगे बढ़ते हैं फिर।
It should work, right? So we made few changes, and will this work? That's a question. Let's try. I have not made any changes in the spring.xml file, so there's no configuration change. Let's see if this works, and let's see what breaks when we do that. So yeah, we got the error. And if you see the error, it says error creating a bean dev, of course, but why? It says cannot resolve to a constructor. Yeah, because we have removed the constructor. And I think in the XML file, we are still using this constructor. So what I will do is I will just remove
Sound is okay. Thanks, yeah.
everything since we know now how do we use it. So that
हाँ, ओके, बंद ही कर देता हूँ. हेलो. हाँ, ठीक है. ठीक है, सब सेट है. Okay.
remove everything. Okay, so dev is basically empty now, and we got a laptop, and the name for the ID for the laptop is lab1. What I want to do is I want to set some properties, right? So we have to basically set the property for the two things. If you go to dev, I'll just close this. We got two properties. We got comp and we got age. And maybe we don't even need age now. Let's only focus on comp. Okay.
Thank you.
Of course, even if it is there, it should not make any difference, but I just want to keep the code a bit clean. So let's say we have only one dependency, which is a computer here. And if I go back to the XML file now, the dev needs to have a computer object, the property. So I will say property. The name of the property is comp, but what should be the value? Of course, you cannot set a values because this is not a primitive type. This is a reference type. So instead of value, it should be ref. The question is what it is referring to. Now, computer is an interface, right? So if you look at developer, it is dependent on a computer, and computer itself is an interface. So I can't simply create an object of the interface, right? So I have to look for the implementation. And in this case, we got two implementation. We got desktop and we got laptop. But if you look at the bean creation, we are not creating the object for desktop. We are just creating the object for laptop. So basically in your container, when you run this, if it works, basically you will get two objects, one for your developer and one for your laptop. Okay, so we'll get these two objects. Now laptop itself is a computer, right? So can we just inject laptop in this developer when it is asking for the comp? Yes, we can. So what we can simply do is we already have the object created for laptop, which is lab1. We can simply refer it here. Our job is
Our job is done. हाँ. ठीक है यार, ये तो उसी तरह का हो गया. ओके. तो बेसिकली हमने बीन्स बनाए. हम कंस्ट्रक्टर के ऑब्जेक्ट क्रिएट कर नहीं सकते, तो हमने कंस्ट्रक्टर को बीन्स में ही नहीं डाला. हम लैपटॉप और कंप्यूटर, लैपटॉप और डेस्कटॉप दो के इंस्टेंस क्रिएट कर सकते हैं. तो उन दोनों का बना के जिसको भी हम कॉम में असाइन करेंगे वो असाइन हो जाएगा. कूल, गॉट इट.
done, right? So now if I rerun this, I hope this time it will work, and if not, let's debug it. But it works. You can see it says working on the awesome project, laptop constructor, developer constructor. Nowhere it says desktop constructor is because we have not created the bean here. And then it says compiling in laptop. So perfectly makes sense. But how about I want the object for the desktop as well? So I can say bean ID, and I can say this is desk1, and I will say class. The class is com.telescope. Desktop, and then in here, okay, we don't have any property there. So now we got two objects, and now if I run this, look at the output. Basically, you will also get the desktop constructor. So it depends upon how many beans you mention here. Okay, so now you even got the desktop object here. Okay, so in total we got three objects. But in developer, which object we are using? We are using the lab one. Again, we have done this before. We know how it is referring now. But yeah, if you want to say this is desk1, that's your choice. I mean, you can mention what property you want. Do you want a desktop or do you want a laptop? So you can change that in XML file. And now it says compiling in desktop. So the way you change that, it will basically inject that particular object in the developer. So it will inject this, not this one. Okay, things are working out. But what if I change the name here? So let's say the ID for laptop is comp. Okay. Now, of course, I have to change here as well. It will work because it will not be using comp, it will be using desk1. But what if I say comp? Will there be an issue if you have the same name? Of course not. See, this comp is basically referring to the developer variable name, which is comp. And the second comp, this one is referring to the name of the bean or the ID of the bean, which is laptop bean, which is comp. And now if you run this, of course, it will refer to the laptop. And you can see it says compiling a laptop. So our theory is working. But don't you think these two names are same? When you say name is comp, The reference is also comp. What if I just skip this part? I mean, Spring is so awesome, right? If Spring is that awesome, I want Spring to actually connect that automatically.
Nice.
What we are doing is we are doing wiring, and I want this wiring to be happening automatically. We have done that in Spring Boot. Here also, if I just comment it, and if I run, let's see if Spring is happy about it. No, Spring is not happy. Spring says it's still null pointer exception. It's because we are commenting it and we are assuming that it will do auto wiring, but Spring says, no, I will not automatically do it. You have to tell me to do it. So what you can do is you can just, in the bean tag, you can add one more attribute called auto wire, if you can see. Auto wire, and you can say by name. Now what it will do is, it will check. Okay, so in this particular developer class, we got only one property of comp, the computer property. The name is comp. What I will do is I will search for this name in this particular container. So in this container, do we have any object with comp? Yes, so we have this name here. So for this object, we have comp. For this object, it is desk1. So it will search, hey, do we have any object with name comp? And yes, we do have it, which is here. So it will try to connect it. And that's auto wiring. So if I run this, your Spring is happy. It says compiling in laptop. He's happy. So basically that's how you use auto wire. But the problem is you can't use desktop here because you can't have two things with the same name. Example, if you say both are comp, there will be a confusion. And you can see a huge confusion. It says bean comp is already used, right? So we cannot use the same ID 2 times. And that's why they're IDs, right? It should be unique. So we can have it comp and comp1. But let's say if you want to use desktop as well, one thing you can do, you can remove the IDs, or you can change by saying, hey, I don't want to go by name. I want to go by type. Even you can do that. So this time I'm not saying by name, I'm saying by type. So when you're searching for comp, is basically searching for these two components here and says, okay, we got laptop and we got desktop, both are computer. What I will do time being is I will just comment this laptop and let's see if that works. So by type, it is searching for the type of a computer, and desktop is a type of computer. But the problem starts when you have both. Now, if you see, we got two beans. Of course, they have different name, but it doesn't matter. We are not even searching by name. We are searching by type. The type of computer.
Front-end developer, back-end developer, full-stack developer, SDE, tech lead.
And desktop and laptop both are computers. And now if you run this, your Spring is not happy. Spring says, hey, I was searching for one, but I found two. There are two beans which are claiming that they are computers. I can't select one. I don't want to be biased. As a programmer, we can be biased, not the framework. So what we can say, okay, in case of confusion, give me the laptop. So I will say primary is equal to true. So you can use the primary attribute. So primary says in terms of confusion, go with this particular bean, which is the laptop. So we are saying primary is true. And we have done this in the Spring Boot as well.
मैं बताता हूँ स्प्रिंग बूट का यस तो हमने क्वालिफायर यूज़ किया था अगर हम क्वालिफायर यूज़ नहीं करेंगे और कंप्यूटर यूज़ करेंगे कंप्यूटर के पास हमारे पास दो हैं इंस्टेंसेस लैपटॉप और डेस्कटॉप गो फॉर एड फ्री हाँ ज़रूर 10,000 सब्सक्राइबर्स के बाद अपने आप वो एड फ्री मिल जाता है हमें तो आई एम वेटिंग फॉर दैट पैसा क्यों देना भाई हाँ तो बेसिकली हमने क्या किया ये डेव में हम कंप्यूटर यूज़ कर रहे हैं कंप्यूटर एक इंटरफेस है दो हमारे पास इंस्टेंसेस हैं तो हम यहाँ पे @primary लगा देंगे तो वो डेस्कटॉप वाला कॉल करेगा तो अगर हम इसको रन करते हैं तो ये देखो आई एम अ डेवलपर वगैरह तो ठीक है डेस्कटॉप का 500 एरर आया है जो कि हमने डेस्कटॉप के बिल्ड में लिखा हो कंपाइल में लिखा है ना अगर हम ये प्राइमरी हटा देते हैं यहाँ से हटा दिया कंपोनेंट है भी नॉर्मल तो अब हमारे पास एरर आ जानी चाहिए ये आ गई एरर कि अपडेटिंग कंज्यूम मल्टीपल बीन्स यूजिंग क्वालिफायर टू या तो क्वालिफायर यूज़ कर लो या प्राइमरी लगा दो तो ये बोल दी इसने एरर कि रिक्वायर्ड अ सिंगल बीन्स बट टू वर फाउंड सिमिलर काइंड ऑफ एरर जो हमने वहाँ पे स्प्रिंग में XML से हैंडल कर ली कूल है पर्सनली अब मुझे समझ में आ रहा है कि स्प्रिंग बूट क्यों सही है तो XML कॉन्फ़िगरेशंस एनी डे हार्डर है ओके गो फॉर इट एज यू आर मैक यूजर, ये भी सही है। ठीक है, ये भी बात सही है। ठीक है, तो फिलहाल कहाँ थे हम? हाँ, तो प्राइमरी बेसिकली डेस्कटॉप पे लग के डेस्कटॉप का चलेगा। अगर हम ये प्राइमरी यहाँ से हटा दें और लैपटॉप पे पेस्ट कर देते हैं, ओ ठीक है, तो अब ये 500 एरर लैपटॉप के आनी चाहिए। एक बार इसको रन कर देते हैं। ओके, जावा एप्लीकेशन स्प्रिंग, और देन ये लैपटॉप का 500 इस बार आया है ना। तो हमारा ये जो प्राइमरी वाला गेम था ये यहाँ से कंप्लीट हो गया एनोटेशंस से। ठीक है, ये सिमिलर काइंड ऑफ सेटअप स्प्रिंग में हुआ है यहाँ पे, कि हमने प्राइमरी ट्रू करा किसके लिए? लैपटॉप के लिए। तो अब जब ये कॉल करेगा कंप्यूटर का इंस्टेंस बाय टाइप, तो इसने देखा कि दो हमारे पास टाइप है, एक डेस्कटॉप एक लैपटॉप, और उसमें प्राइमरी जिसका ट्रू है वो कॉल हो गया। कूल है, ठीक है।
Well, with the help of at primary annotation, but here I'm using the attribute and it says combining with laptop. So now I hope you are able to connect what we have done in the Spring Boot and what is happening here. Of course, XML is not something we love about, but I just wanted to explain you what is happening behind the scene. So now this laptop object becomes the primary one. We can do actually one more thing which we have not talked about, which
Qualifier.
is the app.java. In this, if you see, we are saying get bean, and when we say get bean, we are asking for the ID, right? I don't want to mention the ID. What if I mention the type of the object I want? I want the object of, or not computer, I want the object of dev. Now, will this work? So we are not searching by name here, we're searching by type. And when you do search by type, you don't even have to typecast it.
ठीक
So it reduces the number of words you write, and if you run this, it works, right? So you have a choice. You can get bean by name or you can get bean by type. So in this case, if you see the XML file, the name is not important. The type is important. So you're searching for the object by type. So that's how basically you work with the auto wire concept. So that's it from this video where we talked about the auto wiring, and I hope the Spring framework without Spring Boot makes sense now. Enough of Spring framework now. Let's focus on Spring Boot more, and then we'll move towards the project. So I hope you're enjoying this series where we are talking about Spring and Spring Boot.
We are enjoying it.
And it's time to focus more on Spring Boot. Now, till this point, we have seen Spring Boot and Spring. And then we were able to achieve the same thing in both the projects. So basically the demo Spring, the project which we have created, is for the normal Spring without Spring Boot. And then the My App is basically the same thing with the help of Spring Boot. If you can see the classes, we got the same number of classes and interfaces. We got computer, we got desktop, we got dev, laptop, and then the main class. If you go to the demo Spring, the same thing, we got app, which is the main class, and then we got a computer, desktop, dev, and laptop. And we are doing the same thing. So if you go back to your desktop, or maybe if you go back to your developer, you can see in the developer, we are doing the same thing. We are calling a method of the computer. And if you go to my app, I think it will be done the same thing. Yeah, so we have the computer object in dev, and then we are trying to call compile. Both are same, right? But if you look at what is different is the configuration. Now, both are doing the same thing, but the configuration is different. If you look at the project with normal Spring, if you want to configure this, we have to use a XML file. Of course, there are other options as well, but we have gone for XML. So in the XML, we have to mention everything what we wanted. If you want to get a B,
I salute your hard work and dedication. Thank you, bro. Thank you. इतना हार्ड वर्क कर नहीं रहा वैसे मैं, बट ठीक है, थैंक यू यार।
you have to mention that. If you want to have auto wiring, you have to mention that. So everything need to be done in the XML file. The problem is most of us don't like configuration. Even if you
How do you design a digital wallet? This question is
लगता
often
है
asked in the machine coding round of interviews.
लेना
see,
ही
sometimes we
पड़ेगा।
don't have a choice. We have to do configuration. But then when you have an idea, if you want to implement something, and if you spend most of your time in the configuration, somewhere you lose a track of the project, or you lose the interest, or you spend time debugging your configurations. Example,
मैं चला सोने। हाँ, गुड नाइट, बाय।
I have worked a lot on XML, so I find it easy now, or maybe I'm comfortable to work with XML. But if you are new to XML files or XML configuration, even if a small spelling mistakes will create issue. Of course, it will not give issue here. Example, if I make a mistake here, because of the IDE, I'm getting the error. But if I'm not using an IDE, and if you run this, if you use a simple IDE, which is not showing you this error, and if you run this and then you spend a lot of amount of time debugging what went wrong, right? So that's one of the issue with the configuration. On the other hand, if you talk about our project of Spring Boot, there's no configuration file. Of course, there is a configuration file which I want to show you, which is the application.properties. And of course, you can set your properties here. But at this point, we have not done that. We only got one property, which is optional. You can also remove this. Apart from that, there's no configuration in the property file or the XML file. We are doing those configuration with the help of annotations. And sometimes it is easy to work with annotations. And at least it is easier to debug. So you know what is going wrong where. Now, I just want to compare these two projects. If you go back to your Spring project, you can see whichever class I open, nowhere we are using any annotation. Not even here, not in dev, not in laptop, not in app. There's no annotation anywhere, right? And whatever we have to do that in XML. In XML, what we have done is we have created these beans and we have using AutoWire also. We also specified primary here. If you want to compare this with the Spring Boot, we don't have XML, but if you look at the classes, we got dev class. On top of that, we are using add component. So instead of using a bean tag, we are using add component. Then we are using add autowire for the autowiring. We are using add qualifier. We can also use primary. I think when we go for the desktop or laptop, okay, we have not mentioned, but you can do that. So you can mention primary here. So we can mention primary here, and that is similar to what we have done here. Okay, and so basically what we are doing is we are using different annotations. How do we start the container? So if you go back to your main application file or main file, using this line, we are starting the container. In case of Spring, the normal Spring project, we have to use this new class path XML configuration, and this will start the container. So both are doing the same thing, but in Spring Boot, we are doing less configuration.
कॉन्फ़िगरेशन इसमें क्या थी, एक मिनट. डेमो एप्लीकेशन, यहाँ पे हमने डेमो एप्लीकेशन क्लास जो हमारी मेन क्लास है स्प्रिंग बूट एप्लीकेशन स्टार्ट करने के लिए. ठीक है. स्प्रिंग एप्लीकेशन डॉट रन. एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट हमें चाहिए था और यहाँ से हमने बीन दिया था. ठीक है. और यहाँ क्या किया, इसमें एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट से कॉन्टेक्स्ट निकाला. कॉन्फ़िगरेशन के लिए स्प्रिंग डॉट एक्सएमएल है यहाँ पे, और यहाँ क्लास पाथ एक्सएमएल एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट है. ओके. और हमारे केस में है स्प्रिंग बूट एप्लीकेशन, स्प्रिंग एप्लीकेशन डॉट रन डायरेक्टली. ठीक है, कूल है. ठीक है.
But the magic is, whatever you are doing in Spring Boot, behind the scene, it is using the Spring framework. Okay, so yeah, ultimately we are using Spring framework, even if you are using.
ऑफिस से आने के बाद इतना डेडिकेशन कैसे आ सकता है यार. इसका एक ट्रिक है एक्चुअली. कुछ भी चीज़ जो तुम्हें ऑप्शनल लग रही हो ना, कि ये सीखना है तो सीखें या नहीं सीखें, या ये करना है तो करें या नहीं करें, यूकेलेले सीखना है या कुछ भी A to Z, या कोई इंस्टाग्राम पेज बनाना है, कुछ भी करना है फॉर दैट मैटर, तो उसको ऑप्शनल से हटा के मैंडेटरी में डाल दो, तो वो थोड़ा इजी हो जाएगा. और प्लस मेरे लिए क्यों ये आसान है, क्योंकि मैं एनीवे मेरे को जावा पढ़ना ही था, तो ये काइंड ऑफ मेरी जर्नी का पार्ट है. मतलब मैं अगर नहीं भी कर रहा होता यूट्यूब तो भी पढ़ रहा होता, तो ये वैसा है. तो मुझे पढ़ना ही है. यूट्यूब से मेरे को हेल्प मिल रही है कि मैं उसको कंटिन्यूसली फ्लो में पढ़ पा रहा हूँ बेसिकली रोज़, थोड़ा यूट्यूब का मज़े में और इस सब में. तो वैसा है ये.
Spring Boot. So those are the changes in these two projects. And as I mentioned before, we'll only focus on the Spring Boot from now. Before we go ahead, I want to talk about more things. See, ultimately we are going to build.
कॉलेज कौन सा था तुम्हारा, बताओ पहले. मेरा अजमेर में था वैसे, RN कॉलेज करके है एक, अच्छा कॉलेज है. हमारे टाइम में बहुत अच्छे टीचर्स थे, तो इसलिए कोडिंग में इंटरेस्ट बना रहा। हमारे टीचर्स बोलते थे कि अगर तुम्हारा कोडिंग में मन नहीं लगा तो तुम्हारे ये 3 साल खराब होंगे। मैंने बीएससी आईटी किया है, और अगर कोडिंग में मन लग गया तो ज़िंदगी, तो हमारी अब ज़िंदगी खराब हो रही है।
a project, right? And we have discussed this in the first few videos. So we are going to build a project, and the project which
CSR.
you're going to build is a web project, right?
ठीक
So
है।
whatever we have done till now, that's basically a console project. And now we want to work on the web project. So whatever annotations we have used or the configuration we have used, that's for standalone project. Now, when you talk about web, things are a bit different.
ब्रांच
How it is
आईटी,
different? First of all, when you want to work with a web project, and if you're
ब्रांच आईटी भाई, आईटी।
not using Spring, if you're using normal Java, and if you want to build a web project, so what's so special about web project? Other thing is the web is hosted on the server, and it will accept the request from the client. So in this case, we do have a client here who will send the request to the server, and server will respond back. And this thing is happening on the internet with the help of
कैलीकट मस्त है यार, ये तो बड़ा लग रहा है सुनने में। एनआईटी तो है ही बड़ा, आई थिंक। मुझे ज़्यादा नॉलेज नहीं है देखो कॉलेजेस का। आईआईटी एनआईटी बड़ा होना चाहिए नाम से ऐसा लग रहा है, तो ये तो मस्त है, अच्छी बात है। तो अभी कॉलेज में हो या हो गया, अभी पास आउट हो? 2 ईयर, सेकेंड ईयर में हो? अच्छा अच्छा, कूल है कूल है कूल है।
HTTP protocol. So we have to use this protocol to achieve this, okay? And this is hosted on the server. So that means the application which we are building should be capable enough to accept the request over the internet, which is your HTTP request, right? So this has to be something special. So you can't simply run this on JVM. JVM is only for the machine. Now, if you want this to work on the server, basically
खेलना में है, नाइस है, मस्त है।
we need something called a web server or a web container, basically. And what you
रुको
work
रुको,
with
तुम्हें
Java, or
वापस
what you
करना
use in
पड़ेगा।
Java is something mentioned more on Spring Boot. Now, till the same, we got file. Both of everything. And find it easy now, or maybe there's no behind this
People ask me when I finally felt good.
scene. It is using the Spring framework. Okay, so yeah, ultimately we are using Spring framework, even if you're using focus on the Spring Boot from now. Before we
इंटरेस्टिंग है, इसका मतलब स्प्रिंग बूट बिहाइंड द सीन स्प्रिंग फ्रेमवर्क यूज़ कर रहा है। तो इसका मतलब बिहाइंड द सीन ये कहीं एक्सएमएल जैसी कॉन्फ़िगरेशन एनोटेशन से कर रहा है। चीज़ लिखनी पड़ेगी भाई, एक तो हम लोग भी अपने एनोटेशंस बनाएंगे। सॉरी डिस्टर्ब, अरे नहीं नहीं, कोई डिस्टर्बेंस नहीं है, ऐसे ही चलता है। पूरा कॉलेज में ऐसे ही पढ़ाई की हमने, ऐसे ग्रुप बना के बैठ के और अपना अपना।
go ahead, I want to talk about more things. See, ultimately, we are going to build a project, right? And we have discussed this in the first few videos. So we are going to build a project, and the project which you're going to build is a web project, right? So whatever we have done till now, that's basically a console project. And now we want to work on the web project. So whatever annotations we have used or the configuration we have used, that's for standalone project. Now, when you talk about web, things are a bit different. How it is different? First of all, when you want to work with a web project, and if you're not using Spring, if you're using normal Java, and if you want to build a web project, so what's so special about web project? Other thing is the web is hosted on the server, and it will accept the request from the client. So in this case, we do have a client here who will send the request to the server, and server will respond back. And this thing is happening on the internet with the help of HTTP protocol. So we have to use this protocol to achieve this, okay? And this is hosted on the server. So that means the application which we are building should be capable enough to accept the request over the internet, which is your HTTP request, right? So this has to be something special. So you can't simply run this on JVM. JVM is only for the machine. Now, if you want this to work on the server, basically we need something called a web server or a web container, basically. And what you work with Java, or what you use in Java, is something called servlets. Okay, and servlets run in the web container. We also call that container as a servlet container. But which container we have to use, which software we have to use, which tool we have to use. And the name of the tool is Tomcat. So basically we have to use Tomcat to run the servlets. But hold on, we are talking about Spring here, right? We want to use Spring. See, even if you're using Spring Framework, ultimately, behind the scene, Spring is going to use servlets, okay? And it will run on Tomcat. So if you want to make a web application using Spring, behind the scene, it will get converted into servlets, which will run on the Tomcat. So it's important for us to use Tomcat as well. Now the question is, if you want to use a Tomcat here, we have to install Tomcat, we have to run our project. Spring Boot says you don't have to worry about that. In the project itself, in the project folder in your IDE, you will get the embedded Tomcat. So you will be having Tomcat inside your project. So you don't need external Tomcat. Those were the beautiful days where you have to do a lot of configuration for the Tomcat, set the port number, make sure it is running, create a var file of your project, then put it on inside Tomcat. Listening to it looks a lot of steps, right? And literally it was a lot of steps. But now because of embedded Tomcat, you don't have to worry about it. With your project, you will get a Tomcat. You can run it anywhere you want on the machine, not on your car. Okay, come back. So basically, we have Tomcat here. Next, we need some layer which will accept the request. So if you remember in the first few videos, we have talked about different layers we are going to create. We have a controller layer who is responsible to accept the request. Then we have to use service layer and repository layer. Now these are normal classes, but then this controller is a special class because it is going to accept the request from the client and also respond it. And we have to understand how this works. So even before we start with the project, we'll focus on how do we create this controller. And to achieve that, we have to first understand Spring MVC. In fact, Spring Boot MVC. We'll be using Spring Boot here to achieve that. Now, till this point, we have worked with Spring Boot and Spring Framework, but that was for the standalone application or console-based application. Now, we want to focus on the web. See, the project which we were discussing is actually a web project. And of course, we have seen the project before. But if you talk about the layers, we do have a client here, right? Now, this is a client. And then we have a server with different layers, and then we have a database. Of course, we are using database here so that we can get some data, and we want to store that data for the permanent purpose. So that will store in database, and then we can fetch it. We are using a server which will accept the request from the client, which will process the request, maybe getting data from the database. So there are different operations here. The client is someone who is using this application. So you are the client, I'm the client. So whoever opens this application or the website on the browser is a client. Now this client is not just a web application, it can be a mobile application as well. So maybe you can have one more client here, which is your mobile application. And then this mobile application can also send request and get response. Okay, so basically in the mobile application, the layout will be there. What you are going to send from the server is just data. And most of the time, or most of the application which you are building now follows this approach where basically you only send the data. So think about a mobile application, maybe any application which is your favorite. Example, if you are watching a sport, it can be any sport. And if you don't want to watch the match, but you want to check the score. So we have certain applications which will give you the score. But if you open that application, of course, you will get the layout and you will also get the data. But let's say internet is not working. So that app will give you the layout, but that app cannot give you the data because data is coming from the server. That means app will already have the layout. What you are going to send from the server, it is just the data. Same goes for your client. See, in the earlier days, if you go back, way back in the time, when you send something from the server has to send two things. First, the layout and also the data, right? So when I say data, it can be simple data, but what about the layout? Layout has to be done with the help of HTML and CSS. Okay, and that's what will make your page look beautiful on the client side. So server is responsible to generate both. But nowadays what we are doing is we are using two different applications for the front end and for the back end. So what you do is you use certain things like React or maybe Angular JS. In this, you basically have the layout ready, which will go to the client, and then you will send the request for the data from the server, and then server will send the data. And this data can be represented with the help of JSON or maybe XML. Okay, so that means as a backend, you are responsible to send only the data. The client can be a browser which has React application loaded. Of course, you will have to send that from the server itself, but as a separate thing. Or maybe your front end, or maybe your client is a mobile application where the layout is already there. What you will send here is again JSON. Now there are different formats like JSON, XML. JSON is very famous, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation, which is a very simple and good looking format data which you get on the client side. Okay, so when I say good looking, not exactly it will look good. It's just that it is simple to understand and simple to represent. Okay, so basically, this is what we are building, right? Now, we are not concerned about React here. Of course, you will get the code in the upcoming videos. We are concerned about building a backend. How do you build a web backend? So we are going to create this controller. This is what is important. Now, how we are going to do this? Now, this has to be a special project, not the project which we are doing, because in this project, we don't have the web feature. How do I know that? See, when you go to the pom.xml file, we are saying that it is a Spring Boot starter project. In the starter project, you will not get web by default. You want web. If you remember, when we went for the Spring projects, the web was a separate part. So we have to add Spring Web here. Of course, you can simply add a dependency that will make your job good. But I don't want to add dependency now. Again, it will be more confusing. So what we'll do is, and of course you can do that, it's just that I'm avoiding it. So what you can do is you can go back to your browser. Remember this page, this particular website, which is start.spring.io. This is where you can create a new project for web. So I will create a Maven project, and then the language is Java. The Spring Boot version, so when we are started, the videos, it was 3.2.5. Now it is 3.2.6 upgraded version. And okay, so I will change the group ID, which is com.telescope. Project is simple web app. And then we are going to create a packaging of jar. And the version which I'm using in this machine is 21. So I will go with that. Next, we have to add dependencies. This is Spring Starter Boot or Spring Boot Starter will be already there. You don't have to add that. What we have to add is web. So we'll be using Spring Web.
Need to run Windows on your Mac? Parallels.
Enter. Apart from this, I'm also going to add the dev tools. See, what happens is every time you make a change in your code, you have to restart your server. What I want to do is I want to have a live reload, and that's what you get here. So basically you can also, it also improves your application restarts. If you want to restart, it will provide you live reload that will help to speed up. So we just need this too. Of course, we don't want to include database at this point, but if you want to do that, you can add one more dependency for databases. Maybe the MySQL driver if you want to use, or Postgres. I'm going to use Postgres, but if you want to use MySQL, that's your choice. But at this point, we don't need any of the DBMS or databases driver. So I will simply click on generate. This will generate the project for me, and that's what is here. We just have to unzip it and load in your project. So I'm going to unzip this. So unzipping done. And now we have to basically open that in the IDE. So I'll go back to the IDE. I will say open the project. So this is the project which we got. I will just, it is here. We just have to unzip.
ठीक है, इतना ही था। तो इतना तो हमने भी कर लिया। जनरेट zip is here, अनजिप करके VS कोड में ओपन करो। ओके 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 ओके, तो डाउनलोड्स में आया होगा ये सब। इसको कॉपी करते हैं, कॉपी 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 कॉपी, डॉक्यूमेंट्स में रखते हैं। स्प्रिंग बूट एप्स के अंदर डेमो ऐप हमने बनाया था। दूसरा ये हो गया आर्काइव यूटिलिटी। नेक्स्ट डिलीट। जाओ भाई बिन में जाओ। अब इसको हम ओपन करेंगे हमारे VS कोड में। VS कोड ओपन फोल्डर और सिंपल वेब ऐप। ठीक है जी, तो आ गए हम नए ऐप में। मेन जावा सिंपल ऐप, नल एनोटेशन वगैरह वगैरह, हाँ एनेबल करो भाई। ठीक है, डन।
Load in your project in is, or maybe this window. I don't want this window anymore.
ठीक है,
And you can see, okay, we already have demo Spring. We'll close that. So you can see this is your Spring project. And the beauty is, this is a web project, right? And I have not done any coding yet. In the normal world, before Spring Boot, if you want to run your web application, basically you have to run a server. It can be a Tomcat server or some other servers. Basically, first you have to run the server in your machine, and then you can basically run your project after the configuration. But now I have not done any coding. Still, I will go back to my main. If you can see, we already have a main code here. I will just right click here and say run without doing any coding, and it should work. And it worked. If you can see, it says Spring. Awesome, this text here, and it says this server started. The server started on port number 8080. So that means even doing any code, it is running. At this point, I will just stop it. I just want to show you something. I will just go back to my browser and I will just go here, localhost colon 8080. Why 8080 is because we were running the project on 8080. I will say enter. At this point, it says this site cannot be reached. It's because the server is not running. But what I will do is I will just run this now. Let's run the project, and yeah, bit fast, cool. It says it started on 8080. I will just say enter. Can you see that? We got something. Of course, not the output we were expecting, but we got something, right? We are not getting that page which says this site is not reachable. You are getting something. It says 404 because we are sending a request for the home page and we have not handled the request. How do we do that? How do we handle the request? Maybe I just want to say welcome to Telescope. How do I do that here? And for that, basically we need someone on the server who can accept our request. The request is going to the server, but there's no one on the server side who can say, hey, let me handle it and let me return welcome to the Telescope. Let's create that particular person there.
ठीक है,
Not a person, some service. The way you can do that is you can right click on your project, or you can right click on your package and create a new Java class. And you'll be saying, seriously, we have to create a Java class to handle the request? Yes, a simple class can do that. Let me show you. Or maybe I'm just lying here. Let's try. So what I will do is I will say maybe home. I want someone who can handle the home page request. Now question arises, who is that particular person? Can I say person here? Doesn't matter. Who is that particular person who can handle this? And that's where we have talked about the controller. So we need a layer here, a class maybe, who is a controller who can handle your request. So I will say this is my home controller. And in this home controller, I can accept the request and respond. But the question is, if you want to do that in Java, how do you make something work? So basically we need a method here. So I will create a method, and this method returns a string because I want to say welcome to the Discord, right? So I will say public string, it returns a string, and the method name can be, let's say, greet. So someone is coming to the home page, I will say greet, and I will simply return welcome to the Discord. That's it. Simple class, simple method. And you just save this and restart and see the magic. So I'll just restart this, go back to my page, and the magic. Nothing happened. That's the magic. Nothing happened. See, the thing is, Spring is awesome. Spring is magic, but not entire magic. We still have to do some configuration. Not much. The problem is, see, this is a normal class, right? Now, Spring has no idea that this class is responsible to handle the request for the home page. And we don't want Spring to guess, because once you start expecting your framework to guess something for you, it becomes uncontrollable. You don't know what's happening behind the scene, or if something is buggy, it will be difficult to debug. And that's why you need control. So what I want to do is I want to say, hey, this is not a normal class Spring framework. This is someone who is a controller. So you just say add controller. Remember, in Spring Boot we have used add component. In the same way, if you want to create a controller, just say add controller. Will this do a job? See, not exactly. See, on the website, you will be having multiple requests. We are requesting homepage. Maybe after some time, you want to have contact us, about us, add to cart, or maybe all those features, right? Everything is a request. Request with different URL. What URL I'm talking about? See here, you get URLs, right? Like we can have about, or maybe you can have contact. So this is important. At this point, I'm not passing anything, so that's blank. We can only say slash, enter. So I want to do it for the slash. So for every request, you can create a different method which will respond. So at this point, I'm requesting for this. If someone requests for the slash, which is the home page, I want this to be getting called. And to do that, we have to use a method called request mapping. Okay, so this is the annotation, not method. So we have to use annotation, which is request mapping. And in the bracket of this, we can say for which request. For the slash request, I want to call.
Ambi. Request mapping for slash. Cool.
All this. So that's request mapping. Now, will this work? See, we learn from errors, right? And we will get errors here. Let's see, but what error you get? I will just refresh this and it says, okay, it still says 404. That's weird. But if you see, it is also saying something. It says no static resource, welcome to the disco. Something different. Okay, so it says welcome to the disco, but no, it is not showing the text. But it says no static resource, welcome to the disco. See, what happens is controller behind the scene, and this is how Spring Framework was built before, and depending upon your use case, you can customize it. So what it does is, it says, okay, I'm going to call this, and I'm calling this method, okay? The method is getting called. To show you the proof, what I will also do is, I'll say I'm here, just to show you that this works. And if I show you the console, it says I'm here. That means this method is getting called for sure, but still it's not working. The reason it is not working is what your Spring Framework does, or Spring Web does, is it says when you call this method and when you return welcome to the disco, it will look for a file called welcome to the disco. But why file? Remember when I talked about the old days when a server used to send the layout with data, and that layout is a page? So it is searching for a page called welcome to the disco. In our project, we don't have that page. And we don't want to return the page. We want to return the text, right? And to achieve this, what you can do is, instead of using a this, you can do that in minutes. So you got your application up and running in minutes. It was fun. Now, till this point, we were more on Spring Boot. So, a REST controller, to be specific, to guess. We call a REST controller. Now, REST to guess, because once you start expecting your framework to guess something for you, so this is you have to use with work. See, we learn from errors, right? Go. Something I'm going to call this, and I'm calling this method. Okay, the method is getting called. To show you your Spring Framework does, or Spring Web does, is it says when you call this method and when you this, what you can do is, instead of using called welcome to the disco, in our project we don't have that page, and we don't want to return the page. We want to return the text, right? And to achieve this, what you can do is, instead of using a controller, you can use something called a REST controller. Now, REST API is a concept where you return the data from the server to client. So REST stands for representational state transfer. You basically transfer the state, the data from the server
The data representational state.
to client, not the layout, only the data. And if you want to do that, automatically you can use REST controller. This is one way. The other way is you can send here, you can use one more annotation by saying, hey, I'm not looking for the page, I'm looking for the body, the data. So you can say response body. So what it will do is it will return the data now. I hope this will work if the annotations are correct. Go back here and refresh.
एक सेकंड, वोला करने से पहले हम भी तो यहाँ पे वापस से कंट्रोलर डाला और यहाँ डाल दिया रिक्वेस्ट मैपिंग। ठीक है, हम लोग रिस्पॉन्स में बॉडी भेज रहे हैं। ठीक है, रेस्ट कंट्रोलर का भी यूज़ नहीं किया है, हटा दो। और वोला,
And you got welcome to the disco. So basically what we are doing is we are returning the data, not the page. But if you want to get the pages, you can do that with the help of ThemeLeaf or JSP. You can create those pages here and you can return them by mentioning their names here. But we don't want to do that. We don't want to return the page because the page is there in the React application. What you want to return is the data. And I don't want to use response body from now. What I'm going to use is REST controller because we just want to return data. So we can say REST.
अच्छा ठीक है, हम बोल रहे हैं कि पूरी हर एक फंक्शन में जाके हम या हर एक मेथड में जाके हम रिस्पॉन्स बॉडी नहीं लगाएंगे। हमारी एप्लीकेशन ही डेटा सेंड करने की है, तो हम डायरेक्टली कंट्रोलर को ही रेस्ट कंट्रोलर बना देंगे। ओके, तो इन दो डिपेंडेंसीज की अब हमें नीड नहीं, इनको हटा दिया और वापस गए, चेक किया। ओके, चेक किया, मैसेज चेंज कर ले क्या, वेलकम बैक। ओके, वेलकम बैक, नाइस, ठीक है।
REST controller and a refresh, it works. So that's how basically you return for the slash. What if you want to do something else? Maybe you want to return for the about page. So if someone is requesting for, let's say, slash about, you want to return something for that. Slash about will not work now is because we're not handling it. So if you want to handle that, it's very simple. You can say public, return something, and I will say about method, and you can accept.
ठीक है, हम भी कॉपी पेस्ट, और ये अबाउट के लिए है तो अबाउट, और यहाँ पे दिस इज अबाउट पेज। ठीक है, और यहाँ पे अगेन अगर हम रिक्वेस्ट मैपिंग एक ट्राई करते हैं उनके बताने से पहले, अगर यहाँ अबाउट चल रहा है तो ऐसे अबाउट चलेगा क्या, देखते हैं। तो अगर ये तो हमारा चल ही रहा है वेलकम बैक, और अब अबाउट POUT 10,
You can return, we can use our going to say request mapping, and this mapping is for the request about. So you will say slash about here. So for different requests, you specify different methods. And there's no compulsion that this about should be same as this one. It can be different. Restart the server, reload,
मस्त मस्त
and it
मस्त।
says we don't teach, we educate. Okay, so that's how basically you can have different methods here, and that's how you use Spring Web. But then if you see this image, we have multiple layers here. We got the service layer, we got the repository layer. How do we create those things? Of course, we'll discuss that in the upcoming sessions, but just to give you a hint, for different layers, you will create different classes. Okay, so for service, we have different class. For repository, we'll be having a different class, and they will also have their annotations, not controller, but something else. Next, there's no compulsion that you should put all the requests in one particular controller. You can have multiple controllers here. Okay, and that's the beauty. So you can have multiple controllers. And let me create one for you. So maybe I will just say this controller as a login controller. And in this, I can handle the login request. So request mapping, not request, request mapping. I don't need this import. Request mapping for, let's say, login request. And this has to be a controller, a REST controller to be specific. And here we can have a method. So I'll say public, it should return a string, and I forgot. And why I think it should not work in general is we have multiple controllers, right? And multiple controllers has different requests. We got login here, we got slash, and we got about. How your Spring Framework knows for which request we have to go to which controller? Don't you think that's a confusion? We can have multiple controllers. We can have 10 controllers, 20 controllers. We can have 100 controllers. How your Spring Framework knows?
एक मिनट यहाँ क्लास के ऊपर कुछ ना कुछ लगेगा. आई हैव अ सेंस अबाउट दैट, बट उससे पहले हम भी पहले लॉगिन कंट्रोलर बना लेते हैं. लॉगिन कंट्रोलर डॉट जावा, और यहाँ इसको हमने बनाया रेस्ट कंट्रोलर, और लॉगिन एक मेथड बना दिया. ठीक है, पब्लिक स्ट्रिंग लॉगिन रिटर्न लॉगिन, और यहाँ लगाया रिक्वेस्ट मैपिंग फॉर लॉगिन. ठीक है, चलो भाई वापस चलते हैं. अबाउट की जगह लॉगिन लिखते हैं. चल रहा है ना?
Which one to call? First of all, let's check if this is working, and then we'll discuss how it is working. Or, I mean, if it works. Maybe I'm not good with creating suspense. So I'll just restart this, and about is working. But what about login? Even login is working. So how it's working? So what
REST
happens
controller?
is Spring MVC, basically, or Spring Web, basically has something called a front controller. Now, whenever you send a request from the client, the request first goes to someone who is here. So there's one more layer here which you can't see, which Spring gives you. And this layer here is your front.
Rent done, phone recharge done, groceries done. All that from just one payment app.
बताओ.
Isn't it?
Controller. And this is not something which you create. Spring will create this for you. And this front controller sees all the request mappings. So it creates request mapping for all the controllers, and it knows for which request it has to send the request to which controller. And that's the job of your front controller, okay? And then the request goes to the controller.
ठीक
So
है.
that's about the introduction. Can I say introduction? Yes, because when we start working on the project, you will see more, but that's how the controller works. Maybe you have other questions. What if you want to send data from the client to the server? We have not done that. We are sending data from this from the server to the client. What about from client to server? In that case, we have to send data here. This is where you will accept that data. Now, till this point, we were able to work with Spring Boot, and also we have created our first Spring Boot web project. And of course,
एक काम करते हैं, यहाँ पे होल्ड करते हैं. आई थिंक सेक्शंस आगे के हैवी हो जाएंगे थोड़े, तो आगे का आप कल करते हैं. ठीक है, फिलहाल मैंने रेस्ट कंट्रोलर समझ लिया, काम कर लिया, थोड़ा खेल लिया रेस्ट कंट्रोलर के साथ. राउट्स बना लिए हमारे, अबाउट लॉगिन पेजेस अलग अलग कैसे कॉल होंगे, और इसके बाद का हम लोग आगे देखते हैं. ठीक है देन. तो आज की लाइफ बढ़िया रही, कोजी ड्रीम. एक बार फिर से थैंक यू माइक का बताने के लिए, वरना पूरी हमारा ये लाइव हो जाता और म्यूट भी रहता गेम. तो ठीक है, थैंक यू फॉर दैट, और मिलते हैं कल. बाय बाय.